as many of you know, the Oklahoma City Thunder have become one of the best teams in the NBA once again. Ever really since their Kevin Durant, Russell Westbrook, James Harden days, they haven't been one of the premier teams in the league, but they've always been a solid team. But do you know what the common denominator of both those great teams were? It was the same man behind it, the genius behind the OKC Thunder, which is Sam Presti. Now, Sam Presti has been with the team for a very, very long time, and in this video, I basically want to summarize what his whole career was even before he came to Oklahoma, and then basically highlight all his best and biggest moves year by year since he's joined the Thunder, and why I think he is just simply the best GM currently in the NBA, and he has shown no signs of slowing down anytime soon, and now he has once again built the Thunder back up to legitimate finals contenders, despite being in a small market like the Oklahoma City Thunder. So for all the pre-OKC stuff, I really had to dive kind of deep, and by that I mean read his Wikipedia page, and basically everything I found was that he graduated from Emerson College, and then pretty much basically right out of graduating, he got an internship opportunity from R.C. Buford of the San Antonio Spurs at the time, and from there he pretty much quickly really improved his status with the team, as he started off as just a video coordinator, quickly improved to becoming the assistant director of scouting in 2002, and then became director of player personnel in 2003, and saw him rapidly increasing, and then just 2 years later in 2005, he got promoted to assistant GM. And probably his biggest achievement when he was with the Spurs was convincing and really telling GM at the time, R.C. Buford, to draft Tony Parker. And I mean, I don't think I need to tell you who Tony Parker is. He ended up being a pretty good basketball player. So that was a great addition to the team, and he showed even as an assistant GM how valuable he could be to a franchise. And also he was part of the 3 championships in 2003, 05, and 07. So Sam Presti was a big part of this team with the San Antonio Spurs, even despite having a smaller role than GM or president of basketball operations and things like that. He still made his impact on the Spurs felt, and even helped them win 3 championships during that time. And all of that really combined together to where the then named Seattle Supersonics were looking for a new GM, and they decided to hire him, making him the second youngest GM to ever be hired in the NBA at the time. And after getting drafted by the Supersonics, he wasted approximately 0 minutes becoming one of the best GMs in the league, as he immediately hit a home run in the draft, drafting some guy named Kevin Durant alongside Carl Landry and Glenn Davis. And the only reason I even mentioned the other two is because he basically turned around and traded them immediately, as they traded Ray Allen, Glenn Davis to Boston for the 5th overall pick that year in Jeff Green, Wally, and Delonte West. Now, it doesn't sound like a great move, but I mean, trading a very much aging Ray Allen at the time, Glenn Davis, who was never nothing but a role player, to Boston for Jeff Green, who is a very solid role player his entire career, who is still in the league, I'm pretty sure, Delonte West, who at the time was a solid role player, and doesn't really matter what's going on currently with him, but just overall, 2 very solid moves, and then obviously getting one of the best players to ever play in the league, and Kevin Durant at the time, obviously a gigantic success. But they did not stop there, as he immediately started his first trade, really, that didn't include the draft. He made one of the biggest fleeces of all time. Like, I literally, when researching this video and researching this trade, the trade was literally on a list of the worst trades of all time, and it was 100% on the Phoenix Suns side, as the Supersonics traded a guy named Amir Predizic, never played in the NBA, for Kurt Thomas, 2 first-round picks that would end up turning into Serge Ibaka and Quincy Pondexter. When I tell you how unbelievably fleeced the Suns got. Now, yes, the Suns, their argument was we're just trying to get rid of Kurt Thomas, but they traded it for a guy that never played in the NBA ever in his entire career for a solid role player at the time in Kurt Thomas and 2 first-rounders. Who besides Sam Presti is pulling that off? No world should that ever be a trade, no matter how bad the contract you're receiving back for. And then on top of that, you get 2 solid role players with those first round picks, which is insane. And then on top of that, they even traded Kurt Thomas later on to the San Antonio Spurs for Brant Berry and another first round pick. So even early on, we saw him always trying to accumulate as many picks as possible on top of his trading role players that really weren't going to support them too much, or players that didn't fit their timeline. And even Brant Berry is a solid role player, and for them to get another first-round pick out of that trade is extremely, extremely solid. So if you're keeping track, the net gain for the Supersonics that year in 2007, Sam Presti's first year with the team, they lost Ray Allen, Glenn Davis, and Amir Protazic, if you can even say that's a loss, and gained Jeff Green, Serge Ibaka, and drafted Kevin fucking Durant, okay? Now, yes, Serge Ibaka wouldn't get drafted until the next year, but technically they still gained him as well because, I mean, from the first round they traded for. And they did all of that mainly by just trading Ray Allen and a guy who would never play basketball for them anyway, or in the NBA in general, which is an unbelievably successful offseason if you ask me, and that was just his first one with the team. And then moving on from the 2007 offseason going to the 2008 one, although they didn't make nearly as many moves, the ones they did make were still very, very good, as they drafted Russell Westbrook and Serge Ibaka, making once again another great draft class for them, and really improved their roster just through that. So in the past 2 years now, they've acquired Kevin Durant, Russell Westbrook, and Serge Ibaka just through the draft. And then on top of that, the one trade that they made more, but the only one that I thought really mattered in any way was another fleecing, in my opinion, as they would trade journeyman Johan Patro for Thabo Sefolosha. Now, although Thabo Sefolosha definitely wasn't a star or anything, trading a journeyman center in Petro, who really was just below average, honestly, his entire career, for a guy who once made an all-defensive team and even got Defensive Player of the Year votes at one point, is going to be a huge success. And once again, it was just another pretty much value trade for the Thunder, and Sam Presti just showed this innate ability to trade just below average players for some reason for very, very solid rotational role players, or at least just more valuable players, because I don't think there's a world where you could say that Sefolosha was a worse and less impactful player than Petro, and once again was just an amazing trade on the side of Sam Presti. So in the 2008 offseason, they were able to net Russell Westbrook, a future MVP, Serge Ibaka, a very solid role-playing big man, and a great defender in Thabo Sefolosha, and all they lost was Johan Petro. So if you're keeping track, that is back-to-back 2 amazing off seasons, and he's only had 2 off seasons at this point with the team in his career. And the next off season was in 2009. Now, although they didn't do much in this one either, they're already a pretty good team at this point, they were still able to make an unbelievable draft move where they drafted James Harden. That is now 3 straight drafts where they would draft 3 future Hall of Famers. That has got to be one of the greatest 3-year stretches, if not the greatest 3-year stretches of drafts of all time, okay? Like, James Harden, Kevin Durant, and Russell Westbrook, with Serge Ibaka being even added on top of that, is an unbelievable draft record for your first 3 drafts of your team. And yes, they were high draft picks, but teams mess up high draft picks all the time. Look at the Detroit Pistons, okay? So, for it to work out as good as it did for them shows how good of a drafter and how good of a manager of capital Sam Presti is already. So although they didn't do much in 2009, they were still able to make a huge addition to the team. And then in 2010, really nothing happened. They were kind of just letting them play out. And then in 2011, they would go on to draft Reggie Jackson. And that was really the only thing of significance that happened that year as well. But I still think it was a fairly solid move for them. Reggie Jackson's a fine player. He's still in the league. And he's still a very solid starting level point guard, and even won an NBA championship with the Denver Nuggets. So I do think for sure he is a very solid pick, and once again was another pretty kind of nice addition to add to his draft record. And now the 2012 offseason was probably his worst one at this point in his career, and I mean, you can't fully blame him, because I mean, who would have thought their 6th man of the year guy and James Harden would turn into an MVP in the future? Nobody thought he would, and they didn't want to pay him a ton of money, so they traded him away to the Houston Rockets for Kevin Martin, Jeremy Lamb, and a 2013 first round pick that would later turn into Steven Adams. So although, yeah, not a awful move, because they did get solid players and a good first rounder as well out of it. But let's be honest, for the value that James Harden would become, no, this was a bad move, and this was his first really not great move that he made the entire time. So this was the first season where they actually probably got worse, as they lost James Harden and then gained basically Steven Adams, Kevin Martin, and Jeremy Lamb. And now fast forwarding even farther to the 2015 offseason, where I think the next kind of impactful move that they made was a trade where they traded Kendrick Perkins, Reggie Jackson, a 2016 first round pick for DJ Augustine and Enes Kanter. Now this would start the famous era of the Stash Bros. Okay, Steven Adams and Enes Kanter, they were a pretty good big duo for a while in the league, and just overall, Reggie Jackson wasn't working out with them in the long term with them. He just didn't fit their future plans. Kendrick Perkins as well, Kendrick Perkins. And then in a rare move, they actually traded a first round pick and got 2 solid role players in return. And Enes Kanter even gave them a lot of solid minutes, despite how infamous he would become later down in the road of his career. So I would say overall, it was a pretty solid and even move for both sides. And then just one more offseason later in 2016, Sam Presti would start to cook once again, as he would go on to trade Serge Ibaka for Ersan Ilyasova, Victor Oladipo, and Domantas Sabonis. Now that alone would be a pretty damn good trade, trading Ibaka for Sabonis, who has become one of the best big men in the entire league, and Victor Oladipo, who has had his moments in the league where he has looked very, very solid, and is just overall an okay role player at this point in his career. But then he went on to even improve on this trade, as he then traded Ersan Ilyasova for Jeremy Grant. Yes, that Jeremy Grant. Okay, so that was another amazing trade. So basically, he netted out of just Serge Ibaka to get Victor Oladipo, Domantas Sabonis, and Jeremy Grant. That is an absurdly good trade in value to get back for just Serge Ibaka. Now, yes, none of those guys would end up having long and successful careers with the OKC Thunder. They were still all very good players that they would either be able to trade later down the line or just get a few years out of, and he would play very solid for them. So overall, that was an amazing move for him and an amazing few trades in that 2016 season for the OKC Thunder and Sam Presti. And then he would continue on to have a pretty successful offseason in 2017 as well, as he basically traded 3 nobodies, with the most notable player out of those 3 being Cameron Payne, for Doug McDermott and Taj Gibson to go along with a second rounder on top of all of that. So that was a pretty good return for 3 nobody players. And then even they would go on even farther because they thought they were ready to contend, as they would trade Domantas Sabonis and Victor Oladipo for Paul George. Now, yes, I would say that is a win of a trade, especially for what it would turn down to later in the road. But even with that just trade in face value, I think Paul George is probably worth that. Now, it was not as uneven as people would make it out to be, because Domantas Sabonis is a very high-level player, and Victor Oladipo, even with the Indiana Pacers, was a very high-level player for 1 year for them. So I think overall, it wasn't a terribly lopsided trade, and both sides kind of came out pretty okay. But it wasn't a bad move either, and it was obvious reasons why OKC did it. But then unfortunately for Sam Presti, he would make probably his second bad move of the video, where he would make a rough move trading Doug McDermott and Enes Kanter for Carmelo Anthony. The reason I say it's rough is because Carmelo, I don't think you can argue it, simply did not work out for OKC at all. His career was basically over after this, and he just never was that successful with OKC at all, and it just never clicked. On paper at the time, it looked like a great move, and it looked like they were ready to really contend and be one of the best teams, but it just never materialized. Melo was done. He was over the hill at that point, and just overall, it didn't work out, and you can't blame him for trying, but it is definitely something I had to include, because it was a pretty big move that kind of backfired for them. But then despite that rough move, if you fast forward 2 years into the future, they would decide, okay, this is not going to work out, and we need to do something about it. So kudos to Sam Presti for quickly realizing, this just isn't it. We're not going to win a championship with this team, and he would go on to blow it up in a great way, as he traded Paul George for Danilo Gallinari, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, 5 first-round picks who would later turn into Trey Mann, Jalen Williams, and Dylan Jones, and the rest of them haven't gone through yet. And then they also traded Russell Westbrook for Chris Paul and 4 more first-round picks. And this was, at the time, probably not seen as the great offseason it really was, but now in 2024, looking back at it, this was one of the greatest moves they could have ever made. Because although at the time, Shai wasn't a star by any means, he was coming off his rookie year, I think, he has developed into legitimately an MVP level player and a better player than Paul George. Those 5 first-round picks have made this team much, much better. And then on top of that, Russell Westbrook has never looked the same since leaving the Thunder either. And they got Chris Paul when he was still a pretty damn good high-level player, and 4 first-round picks on top of that. And it really just worked out perfectly. And Chris Paul was one of the perfect mentors for Shai. And just overall, with how much draft capital, with the talent they got back in return, this offseason was one of the best blow-ups we will ever see in NBA history. And then going on to 2020, all I have under it is that was lots of picks. This was the offseason where it was like, okay, they're just pick whoring, okay? They traded every player they could for second round picks. They got as many picks as possible. They traded Kemba for a second round pick. Like, they did a lot of things in this offseason. It was just funny to watch. And although they were having one of their down seasons this year and in the 2021, like, they were going to go on a little bit of a down season stretch here, they definitely came out on top. And this offseason did end up helping them tremendously because we have seen what they were able to do with all these picks that they were able to ultimately acquire. And then in 2021, they would start using this draft capital, as in 2021, they had the draft class of Josh Giddey, Trey Mann, and Aaron Wiggins. And then once again, they acquired a lot more picks as well. They kept doing it. It was unbelievable. They had a stretch where they were getting every pick that anyone would possibly throw at them. They were absolute sluts for picks, okay? Sam Presti was going through a hoe phase when it comes to picks, and it really worked out, so I can't even blame him. And then the very next year, he would start drafting and showing off his drafting skill once again, like he did in the beginning of his tenure with him, and they drafted Chet Holmgren and both the Jalen Williamses that are on their team currently today. And then 2023, it wasn't too eventful, nothing much happened. And then in 2024, I think he had another amazing offseason as he would go on to draft Nikola Topic, AJ Mitchell, and Dillon Jones. And I think Dillon Jones is a star. I think AJ Mitchell is going to be a solid role player. And then time will tell on Nikola Topic. They traded Josh Giddey for, once again, another all-defensive team. See what I mean? Sam Presti has this ability to make trades for high-level or kind of average role players for guys that are great defenders and great role players like Alex Caruso. Like, this reminds me a lot of the Tebo Savolosha trade that he made a few years back. And then they signed one of the best centers in free agency in Isaiah Hardenstein. And if you would notice, this is actually the only free agent signing I mentioned here, and it's because that's just not how Sam Presti really builds his teams, because one, he's in a small market like OKC, but then also just, I mean, it's just not how OKC does things. They build through the draft and through trades, and it is unbelievable how Sam Presti has been able to do this now 2 times when most GMs can't even do it once. And they are now modern day one of the best teams in the West, if not the best team in the Western Conference, and only getting stronger from here. And hopefully this time throughout, they can't just make the finals, but can even win the finals going forward. And I think Sam Presti is just by far the best GM in the league. He always makes OKC a competitive team. Even like their down years, they have hope and have young guys, and it's just so fun to watch them play. They're very solid. They're very good. And I think Sam Presti is going to have this job as long as he wants it, and has earned the title of being the genius behind the OKC Thunder's success. But unfortunately, guys, that's my first video. So comment below. Do you agree with me? Do you think Sam Presti is the best GM in the league? If not, who do you think is? I want to hear your thoughts in the comment section below. Do you think I missed any moves? I also want to hear those thoughts. And just keep commenting below however you think and any opinion you have on this topic. And I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did enjoy the video, hit the like button, subscribe button, and episode road to me. And I hope you have a blessed day, because I had a blessed day, so you need to have a blessed day. All glory to God. See you in the next video. Goodbye. Boo. Blah, blah.